Today, we remember and we honor those 75 individuals who were taken from us far too early.
The Memorial Fountain, a tribute to the 75 members of the Marshall family, taken too soon.
I still don't watch a football game like I used to.
We sat down with Red Dawson, coach of the young Thundering Herd.
It's important to our football team to remember what came before us.
And this year's 10-0 team who wore the 75 with pride.
MU Report starts right now.
From the W. Page Pitt School of Journalism and Mass Communications, your home for complete Marshall University news. You're watching MU Report.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of MU Report. I'm Sarah Connors.
I'm Kayla Markham. November 14th, 1970 marks the worst tragedy NCAA football has ever seen, and a tragedy that is still fresh in the hearts and minds of people in the Marshall community.
75 people, including players, coaches, and supporters of the Thundering Herd, were killed when their plane crashed returning from a game against East Carolina.
And every year since, on November 14th, Marshall remembers the lives lost as the Memorial Fountain is turned off for the winter.
MU Report's Gabby Warwick brings us the story from this year's fountain ceremony.
But today, we remember and we honor those 75 individuals who were taken from us far too early.
The Memorial Fountain Ceremony, held every year on November 14th, is a chance for people from the campus and the community to come out to remember those lost in the plane crash. This is the 44th year of the ceremony, and some have been here for almost as long.
This is my 31st year on campus, and I've probably been to 25 of these.
Hundreds of people attend every year, and some of them choose to attend because they remember what happened firsthand.
I was in 8th grade when the plane crashed, and the reaction that my parents had was just terrible.
Keynote speaker Tommy Shoebridge says he will never forget speaking at the ceremony.
A very special moment to me and my family. It's an honor and a privilege that I will never forget.
He also says that the ceremony is important because it keeps those that were lost alive.
For all of you here in Huntington, myself and my family, we thank you for not ever forgetting my brother and everyone else who perished that day. We need to have them live on here at our ceremony and in our hearts.
Student Government Association President Duncan Waugaman ended the ceremony by leading the crowd in a martial tradition.
Everybody ready? We are. Thank you guys for coming.
Gabby Warwick, MU Report.
The Memorial Fountain will be turned back on in the spring.
And as the crowds leave the fountain ceremony, another more private memorial begins.
MU Report's Rob Engle takes us to Spring Hill Cemetery.
The fountain isn't the only place people come to remember those who are lost. I'm here in Huntington at Spring Hill Cemetery, where behind me there is another memorial, where some of the victims of the plane crash are actually buried.
I just want to pay respect to those people, to show them we still remember them, and at Marshall we'll never forget.
Throughout the afternoon following the fountain ceremony, people came to the cemetery seeking a quieter place to remember those lives lost.
The fountain, people walk by every day, and you might not, think about it really, but here is somewhere where you have to come personally and take that time to just kind of stop and remember the sons and daughters of Marshall that we did lose.
Among those buried here are victims of the crash, as well as other notable members of Marshall's football program. One such person is Charles L. Kautz, who was Marshall's athletic director and Lucienne Kautz-Call's father. Lucienne comes every year all the way from Florida to remember her father who died in the crash when she was 21.
It ends a beautiful day of remembering our 75 people from the plane crash, and it keeps us going, the people, the 75 families.
Lila Mangus says she thinks of this memorial not as a reminder of tragedy, but of redemption.
I believe that the statue here, along with the flowers that are always here, it kind of shows that we rose from the ashes and we went from a school to a family. And I think this area reminds everyone of that.
This is actually the 5th year that people have been coming up to the memorial after the fountain ceremony to lay the wreath and pay their respects. Rob Engle, MU Report.
Looking at the old video of the Marshall plane crash, the pain is just as real now as it was more than 40 years ago. MU Report's Colton Jeffries sat down with Don Hatfield, a journalist who reported on the crash. He told us how difficult it was to report on a tragedy that hit so close to home.
It was a normal Saturday, except that it was very dark and gloomy and rainy. And I thought then about the team returning.
Don Hatfield was a Sunday editor for Huntington's Herald-Dispatch newspaper on the night of the crash, and he says that when details of the plane that went down began to come in, he began to assume the worst, and he thought about how he and his wife Sandy could have been on that very flight.
Strangely enough, just 2 or 3 days before, I had had lunch with 2 good friends and Marshall fraternity brothers. One of them was Dr. Ray Hegley, and they were going to this game with their wives. And he said, why don't you and Sandy join us? And I said, I got to work. And I thought about, if that's the Marshall plane, all those players, Ray, his wife, so many people I knew.
Mr. Hatfield worked throughout the night gathering information for the newspaper, but the reality of it all didn't hit him until he returned home early the next morning.
It was over, about 3 o'clock. I went home and my wife and kids were in bed, and I got a beer out of the refrigerator and went into the living room and sat down, and then I started shaking.
The crash left Huntington torn, but at the same time, both Marshall and Huntington found unity, especially when the young Thundering Herd got its first win against Xavier in 1971, a game that Don also attended.
And once I saw the touchdown, which won the game, then I dashed to my car and drove to the office. People were in tears. Hardened newspaper people. Something special.
Colton Jeffries, MU Report.
Don still lives right here in Huntington.
When the plane crashed in 1970, the entire team and almost all of the coaching staff were killed. But Red Dawson, an assistant coach on the team, didn't board the plane. He stayed behind for a scouting trip, and after the crash, he made the difficult decision to stay on as head coach of the young Thundering Herd. MU Report's Jessi Starkey sat down with Coach Dawson, who shared his personal story.
In the small college town of Huntington, the somber feeling this time of year is felt by everyone, but some carry a heavier weight. Former football coach Red Dawson was one of the few who did not board the plane on the night of the crash. I spoke with him about what the last 44 years have been like and what gave him the strength to carry on.
Different things bring up different memories, and thinking back like I knew them is a good memory.
For Coach Dawson, 75 isn't just a number, but a list of players he patted on the back and friends that never return home.
Kevin Gilmore. He was a defensive back and a running back for Marshall. He was on the plane when it crashed, and he was a New Jersey boy. Good player, good guy.
He says it was difficult the first few years after the tragedy to attend the fountain ceremony.
And there was a tree around there that that's where I listened to the service, and nobody could see me, and I felt very, very comfortable there. I couldn't talk about it, and I didn't want to talk about it.
Dawson says he's found comfort in the strength of the Marshall community as they encouraged him to stay and coach a year after the crash.
And now, since I've learned to talk about it, I can sit out there in the crowd. Kind of gives you something to get out of bed for in the morning to try to build the program back. I still don't watch a football game like I used to, with the same thoughts, and I don't know much about it anymore either.
Although the game will never be the same for Coach Dawson, he will always have a place on the sidelines and in the heart of Marshall football. Jessi Starkey, MU Report.
You might hear his voice calling plays when you watch a Marshall game on TV. And 45 years ago, you would have heard his dad doing the same thing over the radio. Gene Morehouse was the voice of the Thundering Herd. He lost his life in the crash. MU Report's Haley Wade got the chance to speak with Gene's son, Keith Morehouse, about the reason he followed in his father's footsteps.
Hanging out with Dad, and one of the only pictures I think where we are actually hanging out together.
Keith Morehouse was in 4th grade when his father, Gene, died in the Marshall plane crash.
It was one of those days you don't really forget. When you're 9 years old, you don't process it all. But you knew on that night that there was a big deal going on.
A decade later, he shared the story of his loss with Marshall University's student newspaper, The Parthenon.
I think when you're that age, you kind of have a tendency to kind of put your feelings out there. Probably helped me deal with it at the time, and since I was working for the school paper, I probably decided, hey, let's see if I can put something on paper and have it make sense.
Keith says he shared his story to help those who could not.
It's not one person's story. It's not two people's story. It's not just about a movie. It's about people's lives and how they were affected in a way that never changed, that always would live with them.
Keith not only took the opportunity to help others heal, but to commemorate his father. Gene was the voice of the Thundering Herd, leaving behind a path that Keith was inspired to follow. 2 generations later, Keith's son Lake is doing the same.
He has tried to carry his legacy as best he could, and he's done a really great job. In my opinion, has done a really great job, and he's a great dad. And I just it's almost like he's living through him.
Keith now spends most of his time working as sports director at WSAZ, but says he still remembers the day he was offered a job with Marshall that his father would have been proud of.
Got a call from the ESPN regional producer here in town, Dan Shoemaker, and he asked me if I wanted to do Marshall football and basketball on TV, and I said, are you kidding me? Yeah, I'd love to do that.
The job he had been waiting for was a job done in memory of Gene Morehouse.
My dad was 48 when he died. I'm older than that now, and I always felt like he didn't really get a chance to finish his life's work, and so I think I gravitated into this profession because of that, and I'm glad I did.
Haley Wade, MU Report.
Keith graduated from the W. Page Pitt School of Journalism and Mass Communications right here at Marshall, the same school his son Lake now attends. Marshall's football team has been unstoppable this season, and now on the anniversary weekend of the game was a lot more than the score on the board.
MU Report's Morgan Wright spoke with players and Coach Doc Holliday about how they honored the 75. Morgan?
The light at the end of the tunnel towards an undefeated football season is getting a little bit closer. I sat down with a couple of football players before the big game against Rice to see what their mentality would be before taking the field. One word that can describe this Thundering Herd football team: determined.
We just worked our butt off, and we didn't expect to be anywhere else but here.
We felt like we could win every game on the schedule. So, I mean, we feel like we're just meeting expectations that we had for ourselves before the season.
The Herd was hungry for this win against Rice, especially after losing the 2013 Conference USA Championship title to them 41-24.
We owe them one.
Although the Herd was looking for redemption, they were also looking to honor those who lost their lives 44 years ago.
It means so much more to everybody, and when I say everybody, coaches and players, but also to our fans and the community. This is a community that stuck by the football team.
One way the team honored those fallen Herd members was by putting the number 75 on their helmets.
I mean, that shows the whole country, everyone watching the game, that it's special to us.
They understand when you step on that field with 75 on the side of your helmet, you better play extremely hard. Because you are playing for their teammates and themselves. They're playing for a community, a fan base, a university, and for those relatives and friends of those who died on that night.
Van Horn says the biggest way to remember those lives lost is to continue to win football games.
The bigger picture, like I said, we want to win a conference title. We don't want to lose a ball game.
And the Herd is continuing their winning streak, now being 10-0 with this win against Rice this past weekend. Now, both of the football players that I talked to said when they step on the field, they leave everything there. And that passion has really been a driving force in this winning season. And they're going to keep fighting until they get what they want, and that is a Conference USA championship. Morgan Wright, MU Report.
Thanks, Morgan, and thank you for joining us for this special edition of our student-produced newscast.
From all of us at MU Report, have a great holiday season. We'll be right back here next semester.